And welcome to this session on federated identity. How many of you have worked with federated identity at all? Okay, so that's less than 25%, I think, probably. How many of you have come across federated identity at this conference? Okay, that's rather more, probably nearly half. It's been mentioned in many, many sessions, and people have talked about the sort of 3-object model and the 4-object model and all the other bits and pieces. In this session, what I want to do is I want to really look in depth at exactly how it works. You've seen arrows going around and tokens flying around, but how do they move around? How do they get there? What sort of relationships do you have to establish between your application servers and your federation servers and partner federation servers? So I want to get into that sort of level of depth. Now, in terms of, anyone put their hand up as a ADFS guru? Yes? A couple of hands. Okay, so this session is meant for people who have expertise in Active Directory, expertise in application servers, expertise in authentication and authorization. And what they want to do is they want to bring the whole lot together with federation. And that's where we've really pitched the session. And how many of you would say that you would maybe a little flaky of your understanding of ADFS? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I hope that when I ask at the end of the session, how do you feel about ADFS now, you'll have changed that stance. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm from the UK, as you might gather from my accent. And no, I wasn't invited to the wedding. So I'm really disappointed about that. I act as a consultant out of the UK. I have a pretty global consultancy in terms of, I used to deal nothing but Active Directory. And then everyone thought they could design their own Active Directories, and for years it tailed off. And I really specialized in infrastructure security. So I work around authorization space, identity space. I love TCP/IP, so I do a lot of work with things like direct access and migration to IPv6. The interesting thing is, suddenly, the Active Directory work is ramping right up because people have realized they've got their Active Directories in a terrible mess. And we're talking about sort of very, very large organizations, global, and they're thinking, how do we get to the next stage? How do we get ready for federation? And it's interesting how it's changed. Okay, so what am I going to talk about today? So first thing I want to do is really look at what's challenging us today. All right, what is challenging us with authentication? What is challenging us with authorization? Then I want to look at the solution to those challenges, how the solution works, and the benefits. So what benefits do we get from it? It's a 2-part session, and in the second part, what I'm really going to do is concentrate on availability and managing the edge, and also partner relationships as well. But when we talk about managing the edge, you're going to expose yourself to the internet in some way. So do you put a proxy in, or do you use UAG? And I want to show you what UAG brings to the game, because we actually get a lot of added benefit from using UAG, including the ability to actually use Kerberos applications with claims. But I'll come back on that in part 2. So if we think about things today, what have we got? We've got all our lovely servers sitting in our Windows environment, and hopefully it's all single sign-on. All right, if you're getting prompted for log-on requests, then maybe the design isn't quite right. Hopefully, you're using Kerberos. But the interesting thing is, a lot of people think they're using Kerberos, and actually that silent default fallback to NTLM is in place. And I come across that very often. They say, oh yeah, we're using Kerberos, and then things don't work. So be very careful. If you think using Kerberos, make sure you really are. So the problem is with this is when you log on with Kerberos, you get your Kerberos token. So we've got this guy here, SharePoint, and John up in the top left-hand corner, and he says, please authenticate me. I could do the advertising bit, which is for your rich content and your wonderful search and all the rest, but I'm not going to do that. So please authenticate me. And he says, I speak Kerberos. So John goes off and gets a Kerberos token. And this token arrives. And it is enormous. And it's just full of SIDs. SharePoint guy, all he wanted to know was the age of the guy and his email address. That Kerberos token is pretty useless. Yes, it authenticates him, but there's a lot of information missing, and there's way too much information in it. How many of you suffered from Kerberos token explosion? Yeah, it's a good probably 15%. I come across it all the time these days. So what do we do about it? Well, we need his age. We need his email address. So suddenly, the SharePoint developer is now accessing another database. And maybe it's SQL, maybe it's Active Directory, maybe it's LDAP, maybe it's a flat file system of some kind. And they're getting that other information. The problem with it is, number one, all the developers have to know how to do that. Secondly, they're going to reinvent the wheel, because you're going to get different developers doing it in a slightly different way. You're going to get hard-coded strings for the connection strings, and it's not a really good solution. Put your application on the internet, and then you're faced with the authentication challenge. So what do you use? Kerberos. How many of you would like to use Kerberos over the internet? Or how many of you like firewalls that look like Swiss cheese? So Kerberos is known. Forms, probably. Basic. Digest. But the poor old app developer has to actually know what the authentication mechanism, because the way that the user is presented to him in the application will vary depending on the authentication mechanism. So that in itself is an absolute nightmare. Application in the cloud, all right? And you want to authenticate to it. Now, if you look at Microsoft, did anyone use Microsoft BPOS, in dedicated version? So you put your Active Directory in the Microsoft Exchange, in the Microsoft Cloud. Yeah, so what they asked you to do is put your AD into their data center. And Microsoft Data Center Security is actually really, really good. But, you know, would you be happy taking your Active Directory and put it in anybody's cloud? Probably not. So we need a solution for that. And then the sort of very standard problem, which is allowing partners access to our organization. Here, we build a trust relationship with the partner. We say, OK, we're going to let your users access our resources. So you tell us about your users, right? What's their level of clearance in terms of what they can access, right? What's their names, etc. Partner provides that information, and what we do is we create a database and put those users in the database. Problem with that is lifecycle management. What happens if one of those users gets sacked? Does the partner actually tell you about it? Because you're looking after your partner's user's identity, right? We've now got to manage that. So that is another real problem that we have to deal with. So what is the answer? The answer is to create an identity, and that identity includes authentication, and it may include authorization, and that's a framework that can be consumed by all applications, regardless of where they're located. So how does an application authenticate the user? When the application's in the cloud, exactly the same way as it does on-premise, exactly the same way as it does it in a partner organization. And the developer doesn't have to think about the authentication mechanism anymore. The next thing is you allow an identity token to carry different information than just user and group membership, right? Because quite a lot of times an application only wants to consume certain information about the user. So why not craft a token just for that app? Next thing is you trust your partners to authenticate their users. Well, that's a better relationship than trusting your partners to tell you about their users, but forget to tell you when they've sacked them. All right? So they're going to look after their user's identity. Next, real key, make it work with industry standards. So we might be a Microsoft house, but what about your partner? They might be running on something totally different. All right? And what we want to do is to be able to consume identity that they provide. So we need industry standards to manage that. And then finally, make it work for browsers and web services. So we don't want to have to install anything on the client. We just want it to work with whatever browser is actually on the client. So that's what we want. And the solution is federation of identity. Now, if you do a Google search for federation of identity or federated identity, sorry, forgot Microsoft presentation. If you do a Bing search, what you'll find is there are many, many players in the game. And Microsoft's solution is Active Directory Federation Services. A latest release is ADFS version 2. All right? And that's what we're going to really concentrate on. But in terms of the basic concepts, they're the same concepts whether you're using ADFS or you're using some other solution. So what are the key concepts? Number one, we have a player, a user, a subject, a principal. We then have a security token service. This is a service that is going to provide us with a security token. It might also be an identity provider as well. So you'll see it written as STS, STS IP, or IP STS, depending who's documented it. And that in itself will consume identity from somewhere. And I'm actually showing it with ADFS. We consume identity primarily if we're going to actually do the authentication from Active Directory. We then have an application, and that application is referred to as a relying party or a resource provider. The nice thing about it is RP works for both. So we can just, it's an RP. And the relying party is the correct term, but quite often in the documentation you see resource provider. So what happens? The client requests a token for application X, and it is a token for a particular relying party. If that guy is an STS IP, he will authenticate the user. So he's authenticated the user at that point. He then crafts a token, and it's a security token, just for that application, the application you've requested for. So we contrast that with, in some ways, it's very similar to Kerberos. We go off and get a token to talk to a particular service. But that token looks the same regardless of the service we're talking to. Here, we're asking for a token, and it is crafted for the particular application. Having got that, the user then presents that to the application. And what the token does, it says, yes, all right, I've now got claims, or some people use the term assertions about that user. I accept them. Why do I accept them? Because I trust the guy up the top. So there's a trust relationship involved. And we accept it because that token is signed. Now, what goes on the token? Anything you like. You can put age on there. You can put the person's name. You don't have to. All right? Maybe we don't need to know the person's name. Maybe we just need to know that they're from the purchasing department. And we need an email for the purchasing department. Maybe we need an email for that user's manager. All right? You can craft exactly what you need on the claim. So you're working with your developers to actually, they say, and your security and the whole design team to work out exactly what you need to supply to that app. And actually, you can take some of the authorization that the application might be doing and move it up to your security token provider. Because there's nothing to stop the security token provider pulling the date of birth for the user, working out if they're over 21, and sending a claim down saying over 21, so that we can actually figure it out if we need to provide some sort of resource based on the fact that person's over 21. So there's a lot of flexibility here. How do we get a claims-aware application? It's an application that actually consumes these tokens. So the app itself is actually saying, I don't need to know about authentication anymore. What I do is I get a security token. Provided it's signed by someone I trust, I'll consume it. All right? So all it's doing is now just checking that that is a valid token signed by the person that it trusts. And then it consumes the claims that are on there. So we can easily supply a token to an app that's sitting in the cloud, on-premise, in a partner organization. How do we build these things? Well, you've probably heard when some people from the product group talk about Windows Identity Foundation, they call it DUB-IF. Some people call it WIF, and I was very interested to see the product group, the guys in the product group calling it WIF, and some people calling it DUB-IF. Somebody actually called it dumb IF, but there you go. What it does, ASP.NET, if you know it, what you have is effectively an ASP.NET pipeline. And as an ASP, a request comes in for a web page, it goes through the pipeline, and you can do what you like in the pipeline. And WebIF fits into that pipeline. So it can check to see if you're presenting a token or you're presenting cookies that represent the fact that you've got a session already. So that's where it fits in. SharePoint, 2010, out the box, very claims aware. All right? If you want it to work, it has its own little STS built into it. If you want it to work with ADFS, we need to run a bit of PowerShell to do it, to make it work. If you've got SharePoint 2.7 or you've got SharePoint services, then there's a wizard that you can download from Microsoft and the necessary components to make it claims aware, so it can consume claims. But in terms of actually building a claims aware app, it's very easy to do, and there's not a lot of code you have to write to switch from just using Windows identity to using claims identity. So what I do now is just briefly talk about standards and protocols. We could actually spend ages talking about what all the protocols do, but the key protocols here is WS Federation, WS Trust, and SAML. And you'll hear all of those. There are other protocols involved as well. There's the OAuth protocol, etc. But these are the protocols supported directly with ADFS. You can think of WS Federation supporting a passive client. And a passive client is it's a browser. All right? So how that works, we'll see in a moment. WS Trust is sort of used by with Windows Communication Foundation, and it's for talking between web services. And then SAML is a protocol and a format for the security token. So what you can have is you can have a SAML 1.1 or a 2.1 token, which is transported by WS Trust, WS Federation, or you can actually have it transported by SAML. So if we're talking about SharePoint, we'll talk WS Federation to SharePoint as a protocol, but we will give it a SAML token. So but these are industry standards, so if you provided the other partner can talk SAML to you, talk WS Trust to you, you will be able to consume identity from them. So what I want to do is actually look at the federation experience for the user. So starting off on my box here, what I've got is I've got Windows 7, and I've got Windows 7 and a shortcut to Home, which is SharePoint. And if we just look at that, it's HTTPS. Okay, there is no other way of doing federation. It has to be HTTPS. So everything is sort of going up an HTTPS tunnel or an SSL tunnel. And all the cookies that it uses are secure cookies. So they have to be transported by HTTPS. So let's just go to this guy. And notice that I'm not going to home.example.com for authentication. I'm going to adfs.example.com. So I'm actually somehow ending up at my ADFS server. So I supply the credentials. So in here, which is example, we're getting it going as Tom. And what we can see is we've gone into SharePoint, and I have a little web part that shows me on here actually claims. So these are the claims that are going to be consumed. So we have a definition of a claim, which is a URI, and it's in this sort of format. It looks like HTTP schema.xml. It's just a unique namespace. And this is a name identifier, and it's tom@example.com. We're giving his email. We're giving a role. A role can be absolutely anything. This happens to be an Active Directory group. That one you probably recognize immediately as domain users. This is the identifier used within SharePoint. Okay, so it actually comes out of the SharePoint namespace here. 0.5.t, T for trust. It's trusting this provider. Now, I should probably use the wrong name. It's any name you like in there. It's happened to be using ADFS v2, but it's any name you like. So that's Tom logged in. What I'd like to do is actually, we'll take Tom and we'll log him out. So just get rid of Tom there. Okay. And then what I want to do is actually just go across to my ADFS server. And here, I've got claims provider trusts. I've got Active Directory. I've got a thing called example.net. I'm just going to enable that. I'll talk about these in a second. I just want to enable the next one as well. Okay, so the claims provider trust is where I'm going to get claims from. So I can source claims out of the Active Directory. I can source them from my partner, which is adfs.example.net. I'm adfs.example.com. All this thing here, xtseminars-dev, this is Microsoft Access Control Service. So I've just opened up sources from a partner and also the access control services. So let's go back to our Windows 7 box, and I'm going to blow some cookies away. And I'll talk about the cookies in a second. Why are they Maria's cookies rather than Tom's? Because this happens to be Maria's desktop. All right, so they're actually stored in her profile. So she's forgot to lock her desktop, and we're using it. Okay, so now, notice this. Where's it coming from? adfs.example.com. What's this? It's a thing called Home Realm Discovery. This guy now says, actually, do you know what? I trust my Active Directory, which is adfs.example.com. I trust a partner, which is adfs.example.net. And I also trust this weird thing called xtseminars-dev. Who would you like to provide your identity? So we're going to choose adfs.example.net. I'm going to continue the sign-in. And this time, we've gone over to adfs.example.net. Don't look at the URL at the top, but actually, don't look up here. Look here. So adfs.example.net. And I'm going to log in here as Maria. So we logged in as Maria. And goodness me, the claims look remarkably similar. We consume them in exactly the same way. So if you think about the application, it just uses claims. Where did they come from this time? The partner. All right? And what I'd like to do is just change the experience a little bit. Maria is sitting on her partner network. And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change her ADFS server and put it in the intranet zone. So https adfs.example.net. This is Maria's ADFS server. I'm going to add it into, it's in the trusted zones, just move it across. Okay, so that's that. And then what I want to do is I'm going to log her off. And now just imagine she's sitting on her workstation at work in the example.net domain. All right, now she's going to a partner resource. And I think you have to admit that's pretty cool that you can go across to a partner resource, single sign-on, without being prompted at all. Okay? So what I want to do is just show you one other thing, and this is the Microsoft Access Control Service. And I'm going to blow the cookies away again, and you may realize that these cookies are actually hold the home realm discovery. Because when we went, Maria wasn't prompted to select that she came from example.net. Right? It's automatically held in her cookies. So let's just take these out. So we get prompted again. And now let's go back again, and this time choose this xtseminars-dev, which is a namespace inside ACS. And now we've got the option of logging on to Windows Live ID, Google, Yahoo. And we can actually federate to others through here as well. And we can just supply a Google account in here. Just to show that. And we're actually consuming claims in exactly the same way. Now, do you want people from Google coming to your site? Well, that's something you have to think about, and it's part of your design. Because what's happening here is you're getting an identity from Google. What's it mean? It means someone's logged in, and they've actually logged in and been identified by Google. So if we want to use them in our environment, maybe we need to ask them a little bit more about themselves. But what it means is we can get an identifier from Google, associate it with a profile, and we don't have to worry about logon, password changes, or anything else like that. All right? So they look after that side of it, and if we need a bit more profile information about them, we gather it on our website. We ask them to fill in some additional details before we allow them to do whatever we want to do. So you've got to think, it's a new way of thinking. You know, today, if someone comes out of your Active Directory, you know about them. But here, what we're doing is just basically saying Google, you know, Yahoo, all the rest of them can look after username, password reset, and we just consume their identity. Okay, how's it work? So the user hit the claims aware app. Oh, no, sorry. Let's start off that one. We need a trust. All right? We need a trust, first of all, and the trust is basically we're saying if you sign this token, we trust it. All right? So we're looking for a signed token. Next thing, the user hits the app through their browser, and what the app does, it says, well, you're not authenticated. All right? So it doesn't give you back a not authenticated because it's not dealing with authentication anymore. The WIF, or WIF, is sitting in there looking at it, says not an authenticated user. So it sends back a redirect. And the redirect ends up with the user going to the ADFS server. All right? The ADFS server then does whatever authentication is necessary. So if necessary, we query the Active Directory, authenticate the user, so we get the logon dialog coming back to us. And you can use Windows Auth, or you could use Forms Auth if you wanted to. And if you were putting a proxy in the way, the proxy by default uses Forms Auth. So we do Forms authentication against it. And then we get back a security token, and we present that security token to the application. And what the application does is it returns cookies and a page. All right? And you think, oh, hang on a minute, that's all very interesting. How on earth does that work? There's some quite clever ideas going on in this. And if we look at this, first of all, here, let's go suitable color. What we've got is that is just an HTTP GET. All right? So we're going to go get a page. This is actually a 302, which is a redirect. And because we've got a relationship between this guy and this guy, he knows where to send the redirect to that point, which is the endpoint on the STS server. Now, this is actually quite clever. I'm not showing the authentication. Just imagine the authentication takes place, whatever mechanism. We've got the Windows Auth happening in this space. How do we get that security token back to the user? Well, what the ADFS server does is it does a 200 OK and gives back a web page. So we actually end up with a web page coming back here. And this web page has a hidden form on it. And inside the hidden form is the security token. Down the bottom of the hidden form is a submit button. All right? Down below the submit button is some JavaScript, which automatically submits it. So we basically submit the form back, containing the token, straight back to this point here. All right? And if you want to see that in action, if you want to start when you're playing, you've got an ADFS setup, turn off scripting in your browser. And what will happen is you'll end up with a submit button. And you could even do view source. And if your token's not encrypted, you can view everything that's inside the token. So it's quite a nice little exercise if you want to look at it. So having got back here, we then basically get, in fact, I missed out a stage. There's a redirect back. And at this point, let's just go here. We got here, sorry, I wanted to change the color. Here we get back cookies. And these are cookies, which gives us an authenticated session against the ADFS server. So if we go back to the ADFS server for token to another relying party, we don't have to re-authenticate. And here, what's actually happening is we're getting back cookies, and what's happening is the WIF component in there is taking this token out of the page, checking it, validating it, and it's checking the signature on it, and then it serializes it into cookies. So we then present those cookies back, and these are the Federation authentication cookies. So it gives you an idea of how it works. Now, that's working just within our own organization. If we work with a partner, we need another trust relationship, and that trust relationship fits in there. So now, your STS is trusting the partner. So if you missed that, that's that bit coming on there. So now what happens is we hit our claims-aware application. This says you're not authenticated, well, which we get the redirect, and the redirect sends us up to our STS. At that point, the STS says, hang on a minute, you could be from Example, you could be from example.net, you could be from xyz.com, you better tell me. And that's this thing called home realm discovery. All right? Once we've done the home realm discovery, we actually get a persistent cookie. It's a 30-day lifetime on that cookie, and we hold it, and we don't have to do home realm again. If you do want to do home realm, you've got to destroy those cookies, which is why I was deleting cookies, so that I could show you. At that point, we then get the redirect up to the partner. The partner does the authentication, provides a token. The token is only valid between the partner STS and our STS. Right? That's where the trust is. So what we do is the client, we send it back to our STS processes the token, and then sends it back to the client, who finally presents it to the application, who then gives back the cookies, and one more stage, actually, you then get the default page. But I decided to combine the last two steps because I couldn't fit them on the slide. So that gives you an idea, but the key is, in terms of token transfer, the token goes from the partner to your Federation server to your application. Right? So it's processed at the partner, processed at your application, processed at the partner, processed at your STS, and then at the application itself. Certificates, really, really, really important. We need HTTPS certificates, or SSL certs, for communication. So we got an A cert on this guy, a B cert on that one, and of course they need to be chainable to root. All right, so we need to sort that out. And then the issuer is going to sign this thing, and what he'll do is sign it with his private key. All right, for the relying party to check it, he'll need the public key of that certificate, so that will have to be there. All right? And then, if you want to encrypt the certificate, because remember at the moment, by default, unless you tell it to encrypt, it won't encrypt it. So what will happen is, if you turn off scripting, all right, on the browser, you'll be able to see all the claims that are actually inside the token. Because what will happen is you get your submit button, and rather than being a good person submitting, you go, oh, I'll view source. All right, and then you can actually see it there. If you want to encrypt it, then what we need to do is, on the relying party, we need a certificate with a private key, and we've got to transfer the public key up to the other party so that they can actually encrypt it for us. How many of you got PKI? That's not bad, actually. It's it's less than half, probably just over a third of people. How many of you got good PKI? Oh dear, much less. We won't go there. Interesting enough, I mean, PKI, probably 5-6 years ago, maybe a bit longer, everyone said, you must have PKI. And lots of people put it in, and then realized it was pretty useless, because they wanted PKI for doing, producing web certs, and for SSL, and nobody trusted your route, so they thought, go off and buy public ones. But PKI is definitely coming back as a must for Federation, direct access, you name it, PKI is there. So it's certainly something that should, as a sort of project, it should be on your timeline at some point. And for those who didn't put their hand up for good PKI, really think about it, because this is establishing your trust. And if you're working with a partner organization, all right, they're going to trust you based on your certificates. And if anyone can issue your certificates because you've lost control of your PKI, then it makes for a difficult business relationship. Installing an ADFS, you require Windows 2008, 2008 R2. It requires IS 7, 3.5, SP1 in terms of .NET, WebIF, and you will probably need to put some updates on. Look at the deployment guide for that, what updates you actually need. You install and make sure you've got your certificates, right? As a minimum, you will need your SSL certs. You could use self-signing for the rest. Self-signing has the advantage that if you use self-signing, the ADFS server, when it sees the certificate life expiring, will generate a new one automatically. And we can automatically have it transferred across the partner. Some people will not use self-signed certs because they want to be in control of their PKI and their certificate issuing. And I have a tendency to agree with that. So I tend to deploy not using self-sign. Right? But you've absolutely got to have the SSL on there. So you'll have to generate that, or you'll have to go out and buy public for the SSL if you're working with a partner organization across the internet. Next job is you download and you install ADFS v2. If you've downloaded it sort of back end of last year but never done anything with it, go download it again. There was a new release, and it actually takes care of quite a lot of hot fixes that you need to apply to ADFS. Having downloaded it, you run the wizard, and you really choose whether you're going to be a federation server or a federation proxy, and whether you're going to build a farm. And after that, it's all down to running the wizard. But I'll come back to more details of the farm in part 2. In terms of configuration, what we need to do for the, we need to set up a trust, which is automatic, with up to Active Directory. By the way, an ADFS server cannot use any other store for identity, right, as in terms of authentication. So if you've got all your users in a SQL store, you cannot use ADFS to authenticate them against the SQL store. It has to be Active Directory. I think, personally, I believe that was a mistake because I've already come across a number of projects that we worked on where users are all stored in SQL. These are sort of fairly large portal gateways. And what we want to do now is federate, and we can't use ADFS to do it. We've actually had to build our own security token services to manage it so that they can actually use the identity from SQL. But that's how it is today. It is just Active Directory for your identity store. So next job is to you define STS1 as a claims provider, and you define App1 as a relying party. And we have to go through that process. You can do it manually, or you can exchange what we call federation metadata. And if you think we've got the two components, the relying party's got a name, he's got endpoints. So when we get the redirect that took place, we need to know exactly where to redirect it to. So that's the endpoint. It will define the claims it needs. So does it need a name? Does it need an email address, etc.? And also, it needs a certificate to decrypt in tokens, so that would be a private key over there. The STS, well, you'll have a name, you'll have endpoints, etc. on the STS, and somehow we've got to swap information between the two, right? We can configure all of this manually. Alternatively, you do an exchange of metadata, right? And they configure from the metadata. So what does the RP do, the relying party? It puts the information inside the web config file. And what does the STS do? It puts it in its database. What's its database? Part 2. We'll come back to that. So what I want to do is I want to configure WSS, which is SharePoint Services, as a relying party. So I'm actually going to, on here, I'm going to be starting on my application server, which is app3. And what I've got is on here SharePoint Services installed. And the first thing you need to do is you need to create an extension for a web application. Now, if you're not familiar with SharePoint, just think of it basically as a website. And you have a default website, and you maybe have Windows authentication against the default website. What I'm doing is I'm creating, without using the same content, I'm creating another website which uses exactly the same content, but allows me to have a different authentication mechanism. So what I'm doing is I'm creating this other website, which is extending SharePoint 80. Give it a suitable name. I've called it Federation. It's working on port 443. Remember, it has to use SSL. So I'm calling it wss.example.com. And what I'm going to do down here is say SSL. All right. And at the moment, I'm just leaving it as Windows Auth. And there's my URL, https://wwss.example.com. I'm going to put it on the extranet zone. So now can have a different authentication mechanism on this. At the moment, it's using Windows Auth, and it is using SSL. OK, so that's cooked on there. So what I need to do is bind my certificate. So I go down to my sites. Yes, my new Federation site. And I'm going to bind a SSL cert to that. And it's called wss.example.com, which is a good name for it. Close that. OK, so that's bound the SSL. And actually, before breaking this thing with Federation, it's always a good thing to test it. Not that, of course, it would ever break with Federation. So I'm just logging this guy off, or I'm logging Maria off, rather, and logging on as John. The reason being, I've got a whole lot of shortcuts on John's desktop. And I've got a one to WSS. And notice the authentication is wss.example.com. So it is actually the SharePoint extension that is handling this. And I was using NTLM, so I don't have to worry about SPNs or anything else. OK, that's good. Notice who's signed in at example/John. I haven't set up administration on the website. The key thing here, I've got to the website, and I have been authenticated. I'm not authorized, basically. OK, so I'm quite happy with that. But notice the user is example/John. It's a Windows identity. OK, so next job is to run on my SharePoint server. I run the Federation utility. OK, so remember, it's going to put information in the config file. So the first job is I need the web config for my administration site. OK, so just choose that. OK, so that was the web config for the administration site. I now need the web config for my application, which, if you remember, is wss.example.com. So there's the web config file for that, and it'd be a good idea to pick it up. I now need the application URI, and remember, I'm just going to use here, for the identifier, I'm going to use my URL. OK, it's things on the extranet, and I'm not going to talk about cookies now, but you can change the way the cookies behave. Next on there. Now, I need the Federation metadata from my STS. And it's all sort of in the documentation, but there it is. It's a rather tortuous route. It's on the Federation server under Federation metadata 2007-06, Federation metadata data.xml. So we'll just grab that. Pop that in there. And now I'm going to test the location, which is going to pull the Federation metadata. And this, when the first time you see it, looks absolutely scary. But first of all, there's a signature value in here. This is a signature on the Federation metadata itself. There's the public cert for the signing certificate. So there's the public part of that certificate. And if we wander down here, what can we see? First of all, what we've got here is claims type required. And you think, hang on a minute. It's an STS, and we want claims from it, and it's telling me the claims type's required. Remember, it's an STS, which can have a relationship with another STS, and those are the types of claims it requires from the other STS. All right, so that's why it requires those. These guys here, by the way, you never go to them as a HTTPS web request. What these are basically GUIDs, All right, they're unique identifiers. That's a unique namespace, and that is the definition of email, the unique namespace. If we wander down a little bit further in here, we should find, where are we? Yeah, so we've now got the signing. This is the signing cert. That's the, that is used for signing the web request that goes through. Actually, I've got two in there, so it identifies the two signing certs. And what have we got here? Claims types offered. So these are the claims that the STS will offer. And you know, you could sort of spend ages going down through this and looking at everything. And actually, after you've got used to it for a while, it does sort of all make sense. We've also got the encryption certificate there. So that's the encryption certificate that is used. And then we've got the bindings as well. As I say, we could, so we've got the bindings for a HTTPS redirect and also an HTTPS post. So those are the endpoint locations actually for the logout service rather than the logon in this particular case. But we're not going to spend hours in there. So next thing is, by the way, you can schedule exchange of metadata. So if your certificates change, you could automatically update the public keys on the other side. Or if claims type offered change, they could be automatically updated. I'll keep disabled certificate chaining. Next on there, I'm not going to encrypt the certificate. So next on there, it gives me a summary of the metadata, and then it gives me a summary of what the application wants. And the application is saying, I want a name and a role. That's all I'm interested in. WSS is interested in a name identifier and a role. So we can finish that off. And that takes care of setting up the trust, which is the claims provider trust, up to the federation server. Once that's cooked, what we can do is go onto the federation server and set up the trust in the other direction. So we now come to the relying party trust, and we need to trust WSS. So we add the relying party trust, start that, and we need the federation metadata. Again, you'll find this in the documentation of where it is, but just to make my life easy, I've got this rather tortuous path. This is on the WSS server. It's underscore layouts, images, etc. And that's where the XML is for the federation metadata. Notice it's got the display name straight out of the federation metadata. And I can permit or deny users to access the relying party. We'll just leave it permit. Next on there, it gives me a summary. And the job is done. OK, and we end up with this rather thing saying, edit claim rules for wss.example.com. So our next job is to find out what those claim rules actually are and what they do. So if I've just put the requirements on this, you need SharePoint Services SP2 or the Microsoft Office SharePoint MOS 2007 SP2. If you're doing 2010, SharePoint 210, rather than using that little wizard, you actually use some actual PowerShell script, right? And the reason I like using the wizard, it just gives you a bit more of a feel as to what's happening, rather than running some PowerShell and you're not really seeing what's going on. So, but it's effectively sets up SharePoint ready to go. Okay, so what about these rules? What we have is we have a number of areas where rules are processed. So we've got the Active Directory. There's a claims provider trust to the Active Directory. So user logs on, and whammo, all these SIDs come piling out of the Active Directory, right? And they need processing in some way. We use acceptance rules to say what we're going to take out of the Active Directory. So maybe we don't want any SIDs, all right? Or maybe we want some SIDs, or maybe we just want group names. So that's done through the acceptance rules. And whatever we, in acceptance rules, they pile into the claims pipeline. And then what we do is we need to craft a token for a particular relying party. So first job is we ask ourselves, are we going to craft a token? And this is the authorization rules. All right? So we decide, based on the information that's come from the claims provider trust, whether we're going to actually generate a token for that particular relying party. And this applies to a relying party. If it's deny, we stop at that point. We don't go any further. No token is produced. If it's permit, we then take the rules out of the claims pipeline and we transform them so they're in a suitable state for the relying party. And then we end up with our security token, which can be passed to the relying party. So quite a lot of rule processing goes on there. If you've got multiple relying parties, then you basically have, for each relying party, well, you have one set of acceptance rules, because that applies to the person providing the claims, and then that lot piles into the claims pipeline, and then for each relying party, the mouse has gone to sleep, we have our own issuance authorization rules and also the transform rules. So that was just to give you an idea, but the important thing, concept I want, is that we've got this claims pipeline where everything piles in from the claims provider, right, after they've been processed by the acceptance rules, and then we choose what we want to send to each relying party. Now, in terms of creating the rules, they consist of two parts. They consist of a condition and an issuance statement. So, for instance, here, our condition is what's coming in is an email, all right, claim type email. And what we're going to do is we're going to send it out as a claim type name, all right? So our condition is that it's an email coming in, and going out, the issuance statement is send it out as a name. And we've got a little bit more work at that. We've actually transformed the name suffix. So we've transformed whatever it is coming in, we've transformed it to Fabricum.com at the bottom. All right? So that is a simple rule built with a template. All right? You can get a lot more complicated than that. And if we look at the actual sort of processing that takes place, you can consider you have an input claim stream and you have an output claim stream. All right? And what happens is we've in the input to begin with is whatever's come from the acceptance, right? From the acceptance rules. That will end up in the input stream. But actually, this equally well applies to the processing of the acceptance rules as well. And I'm just going to, while I talk, try and change my batteries because I don't like not having a mouse I can move around with. So what happens is rule 1 takes from the input stream. And then what it does is it processes the rule, and then it places it both in the input and the output. All right? So why does it put it in the input? So can it be processed by the next rule down? So now the next rule can take from the input, process it, put it in the input and the output. And the same thing. So what we can have is a whole stack of rules, and one rule is processing the results of a previous rule. So we can actually come up with a very powerful way of doing this. Now, if you don't want something added to the output stream, you can change the issuance from issue to add. And what it will do then is it will add it to the input stream and not put it in the output stream. So we could have 10 rules. And you don't want too many rules because it slows things down, obviously. We'd have 10 rules that simply do some clever stuff and put it in the input stream, and then another 3 rules that take from that input stream and put to the output. Now, if you want to, you can query other attribute stores, and that's done through a rule. So now, let's say if what's coming in is an email address, what we can then do is execute a rule that queries into an attribute store of some kind. Well, we've got one, we've got Active Directory. So we query into Active Directory, and we pull other information out of Active Directory based on the email address. All right? Or you could use a a SAM account name, all right? Or you could go, if you don't want to do into AD, go into a SQL store. So if someone belongs to a particular group, you could choose other attributes that then get added into the input and output stream. Then you could go to an LDAP store, and these, out the box, all you need to do is define a connection string to your LDAP or define a connection string to your SQL, and then you can query it. Right? If you want to, you can create custom extensions. And you need some code behind this, but you could go and extract from any database you like. So if you had your Hoochie Coochie 2010A database, you could write some code and add that as a custom attribute store. Or you could go to Flatfile, for instance, and add that as a custom attribute store. Or if you wanted to, you could go into FIM and pull information out of FIM to actually the Forefront Identity Manager. So there's a huge amount of flexibility around that space in terms of how we get information and what attributes we use. So just an absolute reminder, all right? In terms of who authenticates us in ADFS, it's either Active Directory or another federated identity, STS. Right? Because you remember with the partner organization, we could choose whether we were authenticated by our own realm or by a partner. Now that partner, if they're running ADFS, would have to authenticate you out of AD. But if they were running something completely different, a third-party device running on Linux or whatever, then they could authenticate you any way they liked. And you would accept the claim from there. It would come in, it would be transformed through the acceptance rules, end up in your claim pipeline. You could then query all these different stores of yours if you wanted to, so you could hold profile information and then present a token to the relying party. The claims rule language is, I think rich would be too strong a word to say. It is pretty flexible as to what you can do. It basically consists of condition, issuance statement. So what I've got up there is the very first one, C:, is the claim in the input stream. Right? So what it's saying there is if the input stream claim is of type role, right, and it is sales staff, and we've got a bit of regex there to clean up how we look at it, right? So if it matches sales staff, what we do there, we then issue, right? So that's the equals greater than sign. It then says this is the issuance statement. We issue a claim role, and what we then do is we issue a claim role where the value equals purchasers, right? There is this concept of being able to define who issued the claim and who originated the claim. So you imagine you've got your organization, you've got a partner organization. The partner organization could be the original issuer, and you get the token back, you transform it, you then become the issuer to your relying party, but the original issuer was the partner. So there is that concept. However, don't use it for any security reasons, right? Because it's informational only, because anyone can change it along the path, right? So there's no guarantee of actually maintaining that. The second example there is where I've got the claim. The claim type is email address. And if it's email address, what we do is we issue store equals who is. That's the name of my LDAP store. And I define that. So I'm looking in my LDAP store, and what I'm looking for is to find a claim of type role. And then the bottom line there, in fact, I'll come here. What it is saying query equals name equals whatever this is. Well, there's the replaceable parameter. So whatever the email address is placed in there. So it's looking down through the objects in my LDAP store for where the email equals the name that's just come in. Right? And where there's a match, what it does is it picks department. So we get department out of there. So this is just an example of querying in to a different attribute store. So what I want to do is create rules to allow access to SharePoint itself. So if you remember, we ended up, after the last demo, what I was looking at is this sort of issuance rules that came up, so the issuance transform rules. And what I've got to do is create some. But let's go to our claims provider trust first. So our claim provider trust is Active Directory. And what we've got is a whole bunch of rules in there. This lot up here, 1 to 10, are the defaults. So by default, what it does is it pulls out your Windows account name, it pulls out your primary SID, your group SIDs, and all the rest of this junk. Now, in this particular instance, I could actually delete all these, but I left them in. And the reason I've left them in is because I just wanted to show you there were a whole lot of defaults. The one I've actually added here is what I've got is I'm going to Active Directory, and I'm pulling the email address and sending out a claim type email. I'm then going to token groups, unqualified names, which basically means the name of the groups you belong to, and I'm sending them out as a role. So what it's going to do is for every user that obviously is authenticated, it goes in, looks in Active Directory, gets the email address, and gets their group membership, presents the email address of a claim type email, and presents the group name as a claim type role. All right? So that is in the acceptance transforms. So that's what I'm pulling out of my claims provider. That then goes into the pipeline, and what I need to do is come to my SharePoint, and now I need to issue transform rules. So what am I going to issue? So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to transform an incoming claim. And if you remember, SharePoint Services said what it wants is a name. So I'm going to take the email address, and I'm going to send that out as a name. So now that is transforming email address to name. Because it doesn't change the value. What it's doing is just changing the claim type. I'm now going to take the roles, and this is our group membership. So I'm going to take those and send role. Next on there, and what I need to do is come down here and choose role. So I'm just sending roles, and I'm just saying pass through all claim values. Finish that. Okay, so that is us configured. So what we can do now is go back and get the experience here. Haha, it looks good. I'm being authenticated by adfs.example.com. So what we better do is supply name John in there. Okay, that's good. Again, at the moment, I haven't authorized John access to this website. But notice, do you remember before, it was example/John? It's now john@example.com. So it's consuming that name claim, because that's going out in a name claim. So next job is to actually go and update SharePoint to support this. So I'm going to go into Central Admin here. And I'm coming down, and what I'm looking for is policy for web application, add users, and it's on the extranet zone, if you remember. Next on there. Now, I'm going to use the people picker, and this is an interesting thing. Right, can we actually really use the people picker? Because if we're using Federation, right, where is the identity store? It could be in our AD. On the other hand, it could be in a partner AD. So can we actually use a people picker? And this is a dilemma that needs solving. I mean, there is no absolute answer. I mean, if I knew my users were always coming from AD, I could write a people picker to look in AD. If I knew they were always coming from my partner, and I wanted to communicate with my partner and cache their people, I could write a people picker to do it. But I'm using the people picker here purely to actually form the actual name correctly. So I'm using johnexample.com, and when I do a search, it's not finding that person at all. All it's doing is, because it knows this zone uses federation, it's created a SharePoint claim membership provider. Add that in. OK, and we'll give him full control. Finish off. And there we are. We see SharePoint claim membership provider, John@example.com. So now, if we go back to Windows 7, we should find that he is now the administrator of my SharePoint site. And it looks good. So what we'll do now is just do one slightly different thing. I'll go in here in Site Settings, and I'll create a visitor. So Home Site Visitor. And I've got this group called SP Visitors. So I put role pound SP Visitors. So role pound identifies this as a claim role. OK, that. And I've got a guy called Tom. So I'm going to log in here as Tom. And what we should find is Tom is an SP visitor. Which he is. So there's no way he can change the site settings or anything else. And we've got Tom in. So that's got now the SharePoint services working with claims. So what we need to do is obviously set up the trust relationship. So SharePoint, and it doesn't matter if it's SharePoint or your own application, you need to set up a trust to a claims provider, which is your STS. On the STS, we need to say this guy's a relying party, right? And then we need to craft the appropriate claims to pass down. And that's the process we've gone through. So if we want to let partners in, what do we need to do? Exactly the same process. All right? We become a relying party to our partner, all right? And they are a claims provider to us. So what you need to do is set that up. How do we do it? We simply use federation metadata to do it. So if we've got our organization, we've got the partner organization, and what we'll need to do is do an exchange of federation metadata, and then we've done a claims provider trust, and we've also done a relying party trust. As soon as you've got that in place, what will then happen is when your user logs in, there will be a home realm discovery, and they'll need to say whether they're from your organization or another organization. Home realm discovery in itself is quite an interesting one, because if you have a relationship with many, many, many partners, do you actually want to have this home realm discovery page coming up with all the different partners it can choose? Probably not. So you've got to find some other method of doing home realm. One method is you can actually add the home realm to the actual URL. That's a possibility. So when you tell a user this is the URL, you have a home realm component in it. That's got to be passed on by the web app up, so to actually get the redirect up to the ADFS server actually works correctly. The other way some people do it is they ask you for your email address and then work your home realm out from your email address. So the home realm discovery page is now email. You could, if you wanted to, make the home realm discovery page work out your IP and say, oh, you're on the Example corporate network, you must be from Example. On the other hand, if you have a visitor, that might not work, right? So a visitor comes from your partner. So it's a tricky one to solve as to exactly how you do it. But the out-the-box home realm discovery page is just a list of all of the identity providers that your STS trusts. The logon page, the home realm discovery page, any error pages, fully customizable on the STS. So you can make the look and feel as you want it to be. So in terms of the benefits, remember you've now got the framework for doing the authentication. So we've got this little SharePoint server. Doesn't matter where it is now, all right? As long as it trusts that certificate, we're fine. We're authenticating to it, all right? So that's the real power of this. We can move it anywhere. As far as the programmer is concerned who's, he doesn't care if he's developing code for it, how it was authenticated. He just consumes claims. So there's no worry about, was it Forms auth, was it Windows auth, was it some other auth? Just consume the claims itself. It also allows us to put whatever we like on the identity token. So you may want to know the name, you may want to know the age, you may want to know their full-time employee, whatever you like, you can put on there, consume it. And what's more, you craft for the individual applications what you want to send to them, or the individual relying parties. So we don't have this one token fits all, which is the Kerberos token. Trusted partners now manage the identity and the authentication of their users, which is a really good thing. So if they sack their user, right, then immediately, provided they terminate that user account, that user will no longer be able to gain access to you. What you have to do is actually put together the right business rules around defining the trust relationship. Basically, you're saying, if you issue me with a token which is signed by you, you're responsible for it. And you've got to actually build that into the business rules around it itself. And then it works for browsers. In terms of web services, the browser is the one that's most commonly used at the moment, and it's the trickier one. Once you understand the concept, it's exactly the same for web services, but rather than being bounced around by the browser, a web service can go directly to an STS and say, give me a token, right? And then it can pass that token to the relying party. So it will go, authenticate this person, give me a token for a relying party X, and then you get the token back, and it can be passed through. The other thing you can do, which is a great improvement, is the delegated to delegation, or the double hop is a lot easier to implement than it is using Kerberos delegation, constrained delegation. And again, that gives a really nice solution going between web services using delegation at the back end. So what I'm going to do in part 2 is I'm going to look a little bit more at the claims pipeline between two partners, because there's some conceptual stuff around there which is really important to think about. I then want to look at ADFS availability, which is really important, because suddenly what we've done is we've taken a server and we've said, you're not going to use Windows for authentication anymore. Hey, but we've got this highly available domain controllers everywhere. All right, one goes down, who cares? All right, we're going to say, now it's ADFS. If you've only got one ADFS server, it goes down, you've just lost all your authentication. So we've got to think about that piece. And then you'll be exposed to the web, so we've got to think about the proxy. And then I want to spend the majority of the time in part 2 at looking what UAG brings to the game. And so we've come to the end of part 1. By all means, come down and ask any questions. I mean, I'm not going to disappear for the half an hour, so I'll be here. So as many questions you like. And thanks for coming to part 1. Hope to see you back in part 2. Thank you.